All right. We go. I put dirt in a jar for 6 months and this happened. Let's see what happened.
6 months ago, I put together this jar using nothing more than rocks, sand, and river water. I didn't add a single extra thing, but within just a few days, creatures I'd never seen before started to appear. Insects, worms, tiny crustaceans, even animals whose behavior made absolutely no sense to me. Then I sealed the jar. I left it on a shelf and completely forgot about it for more than 180 days. Today, I opened it again for the first time, and what I found inside honestly
Bro,
shouldn't be possible.
this nigga's gonna open and create a freaking new virus, man.
The jar isn't just alive, it's filled with new creatures that weren't there when I first built it. But to understand how this happened, we must go back to the beginning. I started at a river just outside my city. Flowing water carries nutrients, which helps algae and aquatic plants grow. I looked for a shallow spot with just enough current to make sure the ecosystem would stay active. I took out a jar and began filling it with river sand. I tried to collect sand and gravel with different textures, along with a few algae-covered stones. I also grabbed some loose algae, which would serve as food and produce oxygen for whatever ended up living inside the jar. I filled the bottle with river water. Once I got home, I reorganized everything. Now it was time to assemble the jar. I started with the sand and gravel as the base layer. This would allow a bacterial colony to grow and give small insects and worms places to hide. Next came the stones coated in algae, which would add structure and provide shelter. I also placed the loose algae on top so it could keep growing and producing oxygen. I'm a huge fan of plants, especially aquatic ones, so I always try to include them in the ecosystems I build.
Right.
Finally, I filled the jar with the river water. I didn't want to use tap water or aquarium water because I wanted to keep the conditions as natural as possible. Right after finishing it, you could already see tiny creatures moving inside. The first one to catch my eye was a bladder snail, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's wait a few hours for the water to clear so we can see everything in detail. The next day, the water was crystal clear. As I rotated the jar and looked closer, more and more things started to show up. One creature in particular stood out, a much larger aquatic insect.
How did you not see that? Did that just grow?
A diving beetle, and without doubt, the largest animal in the jar. It's a very effective predator, so it helps keep the population of smaller insects under control and might even attack newborn snails. To breathe underwater, they trap an air bubble under their wings. Here's another species of diving beetle, but much smaller. Another interesting insect in the jar is the back swimmer. As expected, one of the largest and most numerous animals in the jar were the bladder snails. Just a day later, they were already laying eggs, threatening to become a full-on infestation. But it wasn't just insects. There were crustaceans too, like scuds, which look a bit like tiny freshwater shrimp.
That's cool.
And one of my favorites, the ostracods. Tiny creatures that swim around carrying their shell like a little seed, filtering the water and feeding on suspended particles. There was also a
That's so crazy. Like if you jump in water in like a lake, this is what you're gonna be jumping into. Like that's so crazy to think about. The amount of like if you jump, that's why you always shower if you jump. Like no matter what, bro, just pour normal water on your body.
Of worms and a few other organisms that honestly I can't even identify. But not everything would survive. Some species would disappear forever, others would become the rulers of the jar, and surprisingly, some species would appear later that weren't visible at the beginning. I sealed the jar and left it on a bright shelf. I wouldn't open it again for more than 6 months. 190 days later, the jar had changed dramatically. At first glance, it might look dead, lifeless, but as soon as you get close and focus on a single spot, a whole constellation of microorganisms starts sparkling like stars. Some algae have lost their bright green color. They're not dead, but they've weakened over time. Others have sprouted fresh new growth. A layer of sediment has formed at the bottom. Algae and bacteria have built colonies under the sand, and you can even see tunnels carved out by worms.
That's cool.
On the surface, duckweed has taken over, helping to oxygenate and filter the water. But let's move on to the most interesting part, the animals. The diving beetle survived for months. The rules of nature are the same inside this jar, so eventually its time came. Its shell is all that remains. As
RIP,
expected,
bro.
most species went extinct and diversity decreased. This is normal and necessary for the ecosystem to reach balance. The species that has clearly become the king of the jar is the scuds. They're everywhere. No
They run the
matter where
shit.
you look, there are always several.
I wonder what
It
happened to
makes
them,
sense. They're
the
extremely hardy
snails.
Crustaceans with a fast reproductive cycle. They even self-regulate. If food becomes scarce, they resort to cannibalism. Some have died, but even dead, they contribute to the ecosystem. Their shells release calcium as they decompose. They seem to have figured out how to balance themselves. Where they once laid dozens of eggs at a time, now they rarely lay more than 10.
Damn.
It's fascinating to watch the snail embryos in time lapse. They never stop moving inside the eggs. One creature I hadn't noticed at the beginning were these worms gathering on the water's surface. I've seen them before in aquariums that are still cycling, but they didn't appear when I first built the jar. They seem surprisingly social, always clustering in the same spot. Going further down, we find
Ostracods.
ostracods again. Though this species is smaller than the ones I first saw. They have darker spots, while the original ones were more pinkish. If the clip of them attacking the snail goes here, these ostracods stay close to the bottom. I also
Interesting.
managed to record a few copepods. Another creature I hadn't seen during the initial setup. I guess with so many larger insects around, I probably overlooked the tiny ones. They're the smallest crustaceans I'm able to film.
Yeah, they're
Two
probably
little
going
sacs
extinct in
attached
like
to
a
their
week.
back are egg pouches, which they'll release once they're ready to hatch. The last creature I filmed was shocking, a flatworm, like the ones you find in aquariums. But
That's
this
crazy.
one was the biggest I've ever seen. Aquarium flatworms are usually tiny. This one was over 1 centimeter long and surprisingly wide, and it moves incredibly fast across the glass. In shrimp tanks, they can be considered pests, but here they play a positive role by
What do they
regulating
do?
the population of microinvertebrates and snails. To be honest, when I first built this jar, I wasn't entirely sure it would succeed. I've seen it many times in videos, but whenever I tried it myself, it never worked. And yet, more than half a year later, it's still alive. It has turned into a self-sustaining ecosystem, one that
That's cool. The little
regulates
leaves
itself
have
in
developed.
perfect balance. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And if this
That's a W video, bruh.